The media's Ukraine narrative crumbles as Russian forces advance. We're going to look at the latest phase of Russia's special military operation. We're going to see how even the legacy media is admitting that their Ukrainian narrative is falling apart. And make sure to stick with me to the very end of this video when I'll reveal what it all means for the future of the legacy media. You are not going to want to miss this. Greetings, everyone. Dr. Steve here with you. Great to be with you. As always, I am your daily fake news antidote. So come on in to your Patriot Professor's Den, where I help you to think better so you can feel better in these crazy and turbulent times. So if you haven't already done so, you know what to do. Make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. Before we begin, gang, make sure to click on that link below and treat yourself to the best sleep of your life with the one and only My Pillow. And the best part is that you can now get the best sleep of your life with their lowest prices in their history with code Turley. So for example, usually the classic My Pillow is $69.98, but if you use my code Turley, you can get your own classic My Pillow for just $19.98. And that applies to over 200 products in their catalog. So don't wait, click on that link below, get one for yourself. Get one for the Patriots in your life. Let's support Mike Lindell and My Pillow, and let's get the best sleep of our lives at their lowest prices ever. All right, gang, let's dive right in here. So as Russia's so-called special military operation Ukraine enters its fourth month, we're all beginning to get a clearer picture of what's actually happening on the ground in Ukraine, and virtually none of what's happening bears any resemblance whatsoever to what the legacy media has been feeding you these last few months. So that's why you need channels like this one and several others like the Duran, who can cut through all the latest propaganda posing as press to give you a sense of what's really happening here. So let's take a look at where we are right now with the military situation on the ground and see how it compares to the legacy media's narrative that they've been peddling over these last few months. Weapons analyst Scott Ritter had a very, very insightful piece. It just came out arguing that what we're seeing in Ukraine is the beginning of phase 3 of the special military operation. So phase 1 was a month-long opening act which was tasked with knocking out key Ukrainian military targets while not destroying the basic infrastructure of Ukraine, precisely because Russia is using its military operation as a forcing mechanism to bring Ukraine to the bargaining table. This is the classic Clausewitzian notion that war is diplomacy by other means. This is what was called a soft war phase that sought to take out major military targets like fighter jets and anti-aircraft missiles, as well as force Ukrainian troops to split up and defend different parts of the country so that Russian troops could more easily begin surrounding them in the cauldron, as it were. And again, this was all without all the dramatic bluster of a shock and awe campaign that's become, we've become so used to with the American-style warfare. Now, it's most certainly true that that soft war approach provided opportunity for Ukrainian forces to mount an extraordinary resistance, aided as they were by Western satellite intelligence and weapons. And that, of course, gave the legacy media narrative to peddle that Russian forces were getting crushed at every turn. They were getting pushed back. They tried to take Kiev in 4 days, but even, they couldn't even get their tanks to work. Putin's being humiliated. His inner circle's ready to take him out, on and on and on. You know the narrative. But given that very heroic and fierce resistance by Ukrainian soldiers, none of what the legacy media predicted ultimately happened. So that was phase 1, and it was successfully completed. Phase 2 involves the full liberation, as Russia would put it, the full liberation of the 2 breakaway republics in the Donbass region. So that's the republics of Donetsk and Lugansk, and a fully secured land bridge connecting Crimea to the Russian Federation. This involved, of course, the defeat of the infamous Azov battalion and the conquering of the key port city of Mariupol, as well as the most recent event, what we've been actually hearing about over the last 24 hours, which is the Russian takeover of the city of Severodonetsk. And in this process, Russian allied forces, remember, Russia's being joined by forces from both Donetsk and Lugansk, as well as Chechen forces. In this process, the tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops that have been amassed in the Donbass region, they're beginning to crumble, particularly with the defeat of the Azovs. And so now what we need to be keeping an eye on, according to Scott Ritter's analysis, Now we need to be keeping an eye on what he calls phase 3 of the military operation, which basically involves how much more of Ukraine does Russia want to take. Having accomplished their stated objective, which was to liberate the breakaway Donbass region and create a land bridge connecting Crimea to the Russian Federation, having largely accomplished this, Zelensky has yet to come to the negotiating table and work out a lasting settlement because obviously, he's getting billions and billions of dollars for holding out in all of this. And so until he comes to the negotiating table, Russia will have to accomplish their main goal of forcing Ukraine to agree. Russia has yet to accomplish their main goal of forcing Ukraine to agree to neutrality when it comes to NATO. And so as part of incentivizing that negotiation, right, Russia will most likely just continue to gobble up more and more of Ukraine. For example, the key city of Odessa, which, if taken, would completely landlock whatever's left of Ukraine. Russian forces could take over the entire area east of the Dnieper River. They can even begin to spill over into western Ukraine. So that's what we need to be keeping our eyes on in terms of the next phase of the war. Now, with that in place, we can begin to see signs that the legacy media's narrative is indeed beginning to collapse. They're beginning to exemplify, shall we say, a kind of cognitive dissonance over what's actually happening in contrast to what they've been telling you has been happening. Now, I don't know how many of you saw the bombshell piece published in the New York Times a couple of weeks back, but it was pretty astonishing in terms of its tacit admission that all the nonsense that we've been hearing from the legacy media is just that. It's nonsense. The title of the piece was, "The War in Ukraine is Getting Complicated and America Isn't Ready." It was written by the editorial board, which one pundit referred to as the magisterium of the Times. And here's the key moment of this article. Quote, "A decisive military victory for Ukraine over Russia in which Ukraine regains all the territory Russia has seized since 2014 is not a realistic goal. Russia remains too strong. Mr. Biden should also make it clear to President Zelensky and his people that there is a limit to how far the United States and NATO will go to confront Russia and limits to the arms, money, and political support they can muster. It is imperative that the Ukrainian government's decisions be based on a realistic assessment of its means and how much more destruction Ukraine can sustain." My, have we come a long way from what we were hearing at the end of February and all throughout March and April. Ukraine is winning. Russia's already lost us. In fact, Russia could actually lose some of its own territory in this disaster of an invasion. That's what we were hearing. You're going to be hard-pressed to find articles written like that anymore, especially since the magisterium over the New York Times has spoken. Even the BBC is starting to exemplify this cognitive dissonance in its reporting, given how the BBC has been a cheerleader for Ukraine, perhaps more than any other legacy media. I mean, seriously, what do you do now that city after city in eastern Ukraine is falling to Russian allied forces? How do you spin that? I mean, it's impossible. And so I think it's safe to say that the legacy media's narrative is beginning to unravel right before our very eyes. And ironically, it is the legacy media that's having to report on its own de facto deceptions. So obviously we'll keep an eye on how things develop, but I think it goes without saying the legacy media continues to collapse in its trustworthiness in the eyes of more and more people. And as the situation in Ukraine becomes more and more undeniable, that sense of untrustworthiness is only going to sink the legacy media deeper into total irrelevance. Now, before we go, you will definitely want to check out my latest video I just uploaded on how the legacy media is now admitting that Dominion voting software can actually be hacked. You can't make this stuff up. They sound like Mike Lindell. It's hilarious. Make sure to click on the link, and I'll see you over there. God bless.